War. War never changes. Whether it's a product of innate human nature or the uncomfortable reality of a world that could never hope to provide for and satisfy everyone. War is the inevitable outcome in any long-term situation. From the resource wars of 2052 to the gamer wars across every corner of the internet, every individual firmly plants the flag of their ideology, unwilling to move or bend in that conviction until war breaks out. Today, I plant a flag of my own.
Fallout New Vegas is by far the best of the entire Fallout franchise, and it isn't even close. I don't even care. All of y'all can come at me! But that doesn't mean that we can't make one even better. Grab an ice cold Nuka-Cola and keep an eye on that Geiger counter. Let's make a Fallout game! Hey all you heroes out there, I'm your professional protagonist, and welcome to Let's Make a Fallout Game! The series where I design my own theoretical Fallout game from the ground up! Before we lock ourselves deep in our underground vaults of creativity, let's shout out the subscriber of the day. You can be the subscriber of the day in a future video by being subscribed and by leaving comments on my videos and community posts. With that out of the way, let's get to dropping the bombs. I decided to approach this first episode a little differently than I did in my first Let's Make a Game series, and that's because unlike Quantum Combat, which is an entirely original world and concept by me, Fallout is neither new nor original. Fallout as a franchise is quite the behemoth, and has gone through a number of mutations over the decades. There are old school fans, new school fans, Interplay and Black Isle purists, lore nuts, people who couldn't care less about the lore, roleplay visionaries, casual looter-shooter bang-bang-bang dudes, and everything in between. I feel that it's important I spend the first episode talking about what Fallout means to me personally, so that you can get an idea of where my own values in the franchise lie. This way, you'll know what to expect, have an understanding of what I'll be focusing on going forward, and can begin plotting your war against my biases with a distinct tactical advantage. While I think it's fair to say that most fans in the series were introduced to post-war America through Fallout 3, my own beginnings were significantly earlier. During one of my weekend visitations with my father, he surprised me with a box full of music CDs and video games that I'm fairly sure he got from a yard sale or the electronics section at a bargain bin store like the Goodwill. Once I had played my fill of X-Men vs. Street Fighter on the Sega Dreamcast, my eyes fell onto this dull brown box with some sort of strange helmet on it labeled Fallout 2. Amused by the description on the back about how it was the sequel to the award-winning Fallout, which I had never heard of, and the colorful ways it described a post-nuclear apocalyptic America in which you could do absolutely anything, I popped that bad boy into the computer to try it out. Now, let me ask you something. Do you believe in love at first sight? I do. At least when it comes to games. And, oh boy, let me tell you all that my first experience playing Fallout 2, I hated it. Yeah, I was like 11 or 12 when I first tried Fallout 2, and I just could not get into it. For an immature kid with ADHD who had primarily played action and platformer games with immediate dopamine gratification, I just couldn't figure out the game's interfaces. I was also incredibly confused by the game's opening cinematic that spoke with a mystical sort of reverence over clearly sci-fi inspired images. I guess the concept of humanity regressing into tribal cultures post-apocalypse was just lost on childhood me. Throw on the unforgiving difficulty, and a misrepresentative tacked-on tutorial that even the devs didn't want to add. And yeah, this game was a big ol' miss. Thanks but no thanks, Dad. Well, fast forward about 6 years from then, and we got our first announcement trailer for Fallout 3. Now, this looked awesome! And it was being made by Bethesda, the giants behind the Elder Scrolls series, which I dearly loved. Sign me up. But where had I heard that name before? This was Fallout 3, so the game couldn't have been coming out of nowhere. That's when I started doing my own research and remembered that, oh yeah, I had tried to play Fallout 2 for like 3 hours all those years ago, hadn't I? Well, I decided that if Fallout 3 was going to be on my radar, then I had better study up and pay the series some legitimate respect. So that's what I did. I studied the Fallout franchise, learned about it by reading the wikis and whatever articles I could find while waiting for the big revitalization to the franchise. So that's how I got my big start on Fallout as a whole, by researching the lore and history of the games before Fallout 3 came out. And when it did, I played the ever-loving crap out of it. Fallout 3 exists in a weird nebulous zone where technically it's the game that got me into the franchise, but really no individual game did get me in. It isn't the first one that I played, but it is the first one that I played to completion. But only after I had already engrossed myself in the world and the universe. It's a very strange and unusual way of being introduced to a franchise, since usually you'd experience a game, then enjoy it so much you throw yourself into the rest of the material and experience it linearly. Instead, I threw myself into the world in its entirety as it existed at that time, and then experienced one of the games. Well, to make a long story short, after playing through Fallout 3 6 or 7 times, I went ahead and got the original game to try out, only this time I was much more practiced in old-school RPG interfaces. That, coupled with now being familiar with the world, made the original games far more approachable to me, and I found myself loving them even more than Fallout 3, thanks to the significantly better writing. Folks, a modern game made by many of the original writers and developers? I already said exactly how I feel about New Vegas at the top of this video. It's as close to a perfect Fallout game as has ever been made. So began the long wait for Fallout 4. And it was during this long stretch that my passion for the franchise developed into the truly fanatical. I found homemade Fallout tabletop RPGs online and printed them out. Wrote my own scenarios, imagined TV show plots. Threw myself headlong into researching the lore more deeply than ever. Finally, after so many long years, Fallout 4 released, and it was fine. Just okay. I admit, due to its highly noticeable flaws at the time, I really disliked it. Hated it even. Hell, there are still points of it that I hate, but my overall opinion has cooled down over the years. I recognize there's a lot to like. If you're a fan of looter shooters and not a fan of RPGs, immersive storytelling, cohesive world lore, and consequences for your own actions. Like I said, there is a lot to enjoy in that game, but it's also the only Fallout game that I never came back to play through at least half a dozen times, with different builds, because I feel like I got everything the game had to give me in my first playthrough. The tipping point for me was the release of the final story DLC, Nuka World. I was playing as a good-hearted character, trying to spread as much prosperity to the Commonwealth as possible, only to realize that Nuka World is literally impossible to complete in any way other than by being an evil raider asshole. The only way to complete the story is by expanding the raiders to take over outside settlements by force. There are no other resolutions possible. Technically, you can simply choose to kill all the raiders and nuke a world yourself, but that doesn't qualify as a valid ending and instead just fails all the quests and leaves the DLC marked incomplete for you. In a franchise all about choice, this was the unforgivable sin. I put the game down and have not once had the urge to pick it back up since. And that brings us to Fallout 76. I have not, nor will I ever, play Fallout 76. Okay, yes, it has moved on from being the absolutely massive dumpster fire it started as. I get that. And more power to you if you enjoy it. Me personally, I cannot get over how the game launched. But more than that, I cannot stand the live service model, and 76 is particularly scummy in its approach. Factor in sheer time investment needed for these types of games, as well as how I despise being forced to play online, and the game just isn't for me, personally. That's all there is to it. Which brings us to the here and now. And just like the perk here and now, I'm looking to give you an instant level up in knowledge! I think it's pretty apparent by this point that my primary draw into the series, and what I find the most important, is the writing, the lore, and the roleplay elements, particularly in having meaningful choices with tangible consequences. That said, I'm no stranger to evolving and changing game mechanics. I don't write off the alterations made by Fallout 4 out of hand, and in many regards, certain mechanics do need an overhaul. I like to think that I'm capable of observing what works in every installment, picking the right mechanics, evolving them in ways that work together, while also devising new ones to elevate where Fallout can go as a whole. Now, as for my approach to the lore and plot, that's a bit tricky to tackle directly. A lot of things have changed over the years, particularly once Bethesda took over. We all like to say that whatever happens in the games is the primary media of the franchise is king when it comes to canon, but Fallout has struggled more than most intellectual properties with the concept of a consistent canon. Some events were intended as references or one-off jokes that were brought back as actual plot points, see Mothership Zeta, and vice versa. The tone has radically shifted between entries, even just between 1 and 2. Detailed design documents that were once considered holy guides have since been discarded under the vision of the new creators. Entire spin-off games have been referenced in the mainline series, but with details altered or left intentionally vague. And this isn't even exclusively a Bethesda-era circumstance either, since even back in the Black Isle days you could get conflicting information from Chris Avallone and Tim Kaine in a classic the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing kind of scenario. Case in point, one of the biggest ones being how many of the Wasteland mutations are just related to radiation versus radiation plus FEV being released into the atmosphere. For my approach, I'm choosing to take the same mindset as Bethesda does for the most part, in that I don't want to outright conflict with existing material in the games, but I also don't want to let existing lore get in the way of creating new good concepts. So here's how I'll be considering all the Fallout material as I design my own game. Mainline games! Canon is king. I will be going out of my way not to contradict any material in the main series unless it's clearly a non-canon joke event, or I can cleverly work a canon-friendly explanation into the material. Since I'm unfamiliar with the material brought in by Fallout 76, and it's updating with new stuff regularly, I won't be able to keep on it too much, but due to the difference in location and timeline, it's doubtful to be relevant to me anyway. Fallout Bible and Van Buren design documents. Whenever they do not contradict existing game canon, I will strongly consider them for inspiration, but I will not be tied down to them. Fallout Tactics! This spin-off was incredibly goofy, and didn't fit in even when it was first released. Well, we know that some version of events are canon. The only concrete details are that a chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel were present in the Midwestern United States, and that's it! Tactics will be wholly disregarded, despite the climax of that game taking place in this region. And I do believe that's all of the relevant sources outside the mainline game series. If I missed any, just assume I'll be considering them under similar guidelines. But now you know my history with the Fallout franchise, where my values lie, and what I will be focusing on. I look forward to seeing you in the rocky wasteland as we design the chaotic battleground that is Fallout Red State. Because war never changes. And hey, if you're new around here and like the idea of seeing someone come up with ideas for designing their own video games, then check out the playlist for my original fighting game Quantum Combat right here. Until next time, let's all celebrate with a great, big, hell yeah!